Hello and welcome back to the Potting Shed. I'm Chris Lambert, a gardener and a lecturer in horticulture here at BCA. In today's episode, I'll talk you through how to divide plants and show you how to create an amazing teacup garden. Hi there and welcome to the Arid House here at BCA. In here, the students grow a range of plants from more exotic climates, which prefer a more arid and water-free environment. One of my favourites here is Audrey 2, this beautiful agave or century plant. I have to be a little bit careful that it doesn't poke me in the eye. So today we're going to be talking about dividing of plants. It's a really simple process and one that is really often done at this time of the year as our new growth is starting to feel the warmth of that springtime sun and come through and show its new shoots. Now, not all plants can be divided, but where you can see that is where you can see a plant which has lots of shoots that are all individuals and go down to what's called a crown. Now, it's a really useful thing to do, not only to propagate new material, and by that I mean get new plants from that, but it's also a very useful thing to do with congested plants, plants that have been in the ground for a very long time. And it really suits herbaceous plants, and these are plants which generally die down to the base each year. Straightforward, and it can be as simple as this one I just lifted, and you can simply pull it apart with your hands. And you can hear that gentle kind of noise of it stretching and then giving way. And each of these can then form into whole new plants, whole new clumps. And you can see from one plant, I can get many. You can keep going kind of even to tiny little shoots. And each of those will then grow really, really well in that season to become a whole new adult. And this is what the horticultural industry, the trade, all garden centres are doing all the time. Now, the real useful thing with division is it means that each of these parts is genetically identical to the same parent plant that it came from. So each of these, if that produces a yellow flower, that one will produce exactly the same yellow flower. So it's a way by which we can kind of propagate a plant which has characteristics that we really want to preserve. So that's a nice simple way that we can kind of easily propagate. Each of those we would then pot up into its own individual plant pot, and those would then grow on to become a nice mature plant probably within a year. So each of those will be potted up as so. There are different forms of propagation by division, and each plant has its own nuances because each plant has its own growing styles. So that Hemerocolis, that daylily, was nice and straightforward. It was a smaller plant. As plants get a bit more congested, sometimes you have to reach for increasingly larger tools and materials to actually deal with them. Now, another common plant I have here is an iris. Now, it looks a bit sad at this time of year, but then most of us do, and it's definitely in dire need of a lockdown haircut. All of that natural kind of growth has now just kind of destroyed itself, grown down to those growing points. We just removed that, get rid of that, and we're left with these rhizomes here. Now you can see that we've got a series of growth points here. This pot you can see is quite congested, so it's a perfect time to do some division. So I carefully upend it, have that out, and each of these rhizomes, as you see, I can gently pull them apart, and you can see that that one plant, a gentle pull, become one, two, and three. Can even turn that into four. It's like a magic act, this. As long as it's got a growth point and it's got roots, it's another one. And even here, when I've got a smaller bit of growth here, I can reach for my secateurs, hack through that, and that's yet another plant. So from one congested plant, we have a whole series of brand new plants that can be potted up and turned into a hole. I can expand my garden with that. So it's a really cheap way of making sure that I can extend my garden. I can then provide these for neighbours who have obviously kind of made kind of due note of the beauty of our garden. So I can provide them with one as a gift. So that's how I would go about splitting an iris. Then I'll move on to this nice plant I have here, which is an ajuga. Now again, it's very clustered, but you can see it has lots of growth points all through there. You can see it's become a bit root balled, so it's a perfect time for a little bit of splitting. Now this is where I'm going to reach for something a little bit different, a different process. I'm going to have a little look kind of to find where its growth points are. So I've got a cluster here, and a cluster here, and a cluster there. Now, it won't pull apart very easily. So what we're going to do is we're going to go in with a little hand fork, stab that through there, stab that through there, and hopefully, I love that sound, by gently prising them apart, giving it a gentle pull, I've got a whole new plant there. So when a plant has become all clustered, I can split it down into kind of larger chunks, and then I can move them slightly further apart when I replant, therefore giving that plant a new lease of life. And it may seem destructive by attacking those roots, but this reinvigorates the plant, and this gives it room to expand so it's not clustered and it's not competing with itself and its own offshoots. So I've got one plant there. Again, I find my growth, my crown here, so I can kind of lift that, divide, again, go in with the fork, back to back, wiggle them about, and there I have one plant become three. Again, you could kind of go in further and I could start to split even smaller ones, but it's generally best if you don't do it too much. And what I would do here is I would give it a little bit of a haircut. Just take some of those shoots, but not wanting to waste a thing. You can see that even with these shoots, if I tidy them up, and if I show you down the bottom here, those little runners have tiny little root clusters there, that if I took that, chop that off and put that in some compost, remove any of those dead leaves, bish bash bosh in a Jamie Oliver style, that will become a brand new plant. So one plant can keep producing many, many, many different plants. So you don't need to go to the garden centre to buy brand new plants every time. You can just split those ones that you have, swap them with neighbours once lockdown ends, go to little plant sharing groups. They can also help to provide little offshoots and plants, and that way you can really kind of change your garden, get a whole new load of plants. And much as we like to support our garden centres, it's a damn sight cheaper to do it like this. Now, finally, these are herbaceous perennials, and these are ones from our garden. But some houseplants are also propagated by division. And I've got this really interesting spiky plant here. Now this spiky plant, you can see it's an indoor plant. It's not herbaceous. It's herbaceous, but it doesn't die down. And this is producing lots of clusters here. So anywhere you see new shoots developing, that plant is ready for propagation. And because houseplants are increasingly popular, it's a really good thing to do by propagating these by division or taking those offshoots. So again, nice and simple. What I do, take that off, carefully find these little growth points and just give them a gentle pull, making sure that I can see that that's got roots on that. You might want to go in with a little bit of knife, and you can see that that there has a little bit of root there, and that will become a whole new plant. Or alternatively, I can use this to make a little container plant or even something for a teacup garden. Today we're going to be making a teacup garden. Now, a teacup garden is just container gardening, but at a much smaller scale. It doesn't have to be a teacup. It can be any sort of little container, and here's an example of some containers I've salvaged over time. It doesn't have to be multiple plants, it can be just one plant, like this wonderful money plant here. You can put them in any form of container. They can be metallic, they can be ceramic, anything that your imagination kind of lets you kind of think of. They won't have drainage, so it's something you do need to consider. So here I have my teacup and saucer. I'm going to move my saucer to one side, so I'm just working with that so I'm not getting that in a mess. The compost we're going to use is just standard compost. You could use a potting compost, you could use a seed sowing compost. It doesn't matter, as long as it's sieved or it's broken down nicely. So make sure you've got everything to hand before we start looking at our plants. The plants that we're going to use are plants that we call succulents. Now, succulent plants survive on very little water by locking up and holding onto that water within their leaves. The reason we're using succulents is these plants are much more able to survive the conditions in these smaller containers. They're used to growing in cracks of rocks. They're used to kind of having very little water, so a bit of neglect. So they're really, really useful for it. You can find these plants at your local garden centre, and best to buy small rather than large. But if you do have a large plant, you could also maybe split and divide those plants or pick off smaller parts of those to then put into your teacup or container. So these plants are a wonderful little range. We've got different heights, we've got different colours, we've got different shapes and forms, and that's what we want for a nice and attractive display. It's good to have an idea in your mind before you start, otherwise you'll be pulling plants out this way and that and not knowing whether they'll all fit in. It's easy to get a little bit excited with something like this and have far too many, but it's better to have too many than too few. So I'm going to start by taking out some of these plants that I've got, and this one I can see has a number of offshoots from its main one. So I will carefully remove this out, and you'll see I can just pull to one side this plant and it has plenty of roots in. So this will be my bigger plant in here, and I can see if the roots will fit. I'll just tuck that in there, and I've got to go, that should work nicely there. So that'll be my height. Okay. It's very important that when we plant it kind of with as much space for the roots to develop, because they will grow in here even though they're restricted. So I'll put that to one side. I'll take this other Horworthia, which is a really attractive plant, and you can see it's not got much in the way of roots. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to very carefully crumble some of that excess compost, gently shake it off, and then I can kind of put that into that pot. So we want to save some of that compost. We don't want to completely expose the roots. So I'm going to build it as I go. So that Horworthia will look really attractive tucked in with this purple aloe. Now those look really nice. I've got different heights, different colours, different textures. I'm going to come in now with this plant which is called Jade Necklace. Lovely plant, very delicate. Looks quite alien-like in its kind of foliage there. I'm going to take off any weeds or moss that's on the surface because we don't want those. I'm going to tap those roots. You can see it's got a good rooting zone. I don't want to damage that too much, but at the same time, I do need to kind of make sure that there's enough room for it to go in. So what I'll do is just make sure that those roots are going in, make sure nothing is sticking out, and you can see how lovely that looks. So we've got a nice vibrant colour there. Now we've got this little gap here, which is fine, and we could absolutely leave that, but in for a penny, in for a pound here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to carefully find one of these sempervivums here, and this is one I plucked out earlier. It's got a little bit of root here, so it's absolutely fine. It will survive. I've given it a bit of a clean up of some of its dead leaves. Now I'm going to really carefully tuck in a little bit of additional compost. Just tuck that in there, and you can see that fills in that space really nicely. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to slowly rotate this gently. You can use a pencil if you want here. What I'm doing is just using my finger to kind of move round the plant. Try not to get too much compost on the leaves. It will wash off, but what you don't want to do is, these plants are succulents. They're used to drier environments. They don't want to be covered in compost. So it is a delicate job. So it's about being careful, about carefully ensuring that those plants have enough soil or compost over their roots. Make sure that when you finish this, we're going to give it a gentle pull, and we've got to make sure that those plants are firmly in there, that they don't come away. This compost is going to give them some nutrients. It's going to hold on to the water, which is essential for them to continue to grow. They won't flourish in here because obviously there's not much space, and normally we want to give more space for plants' roots to grow. So they won't flourish, but they will grow in here quite happily. And this makes a lovely gift. It's a really nice thing to give to someone, especially if you've grown these plants yourself, if you've propagated them by dividing them. I have a tendency to wander around whenever I see someone with a plant that I really like. I ask them for a little bit of it, and I take what we call pups. So the little shoots or offshoots from that plant. What we do is we make sure then I've got an ever-changing stock of plants for use in projects like this. So, starting to firm up quite nicely under there. I've worked my fingers. Lucky that I've got nice little kind of narrow fingers. If you've got big sausage fingers, as I said, maybe use a pencil. That will help. Okay. Ask for supervision from an adult if you're not an adult doing this. Now, I've got to a nice little point there where these plants are firmly in there. If I give them a gentle pull, they don't come away. So, now that I've got a display that I quite like, I can top it off with what we call horticultural grit, which is a nice, very fine stone. So what you want to do is then look at that, make sure it's nice and clean, and then apply it around the base of the plant. You want to have a level about, no more than 1 centimetre thick. Keep poking it down into there. Make sure it's nice and affixed to the compost. Try not to get any compost on the leaves. Try not to get any stones in amongst the clefts of the plants. Turn it round. Make sure that it's nice and evenly spread and it's in all of those little nooks and crannies. Don't worry about a little bit of wastage there. It's not a problem. You can reuse that. We always like to recycle that. Turn it round, keep having a look at it, brush it off, and there you have a really nice and attractive little miniature garden there. Perfect gift. And you can see how easy that was to create. So go on, give it a go, and you can create something as beautiful as this. Thanks for joining us in the potting shed. If you have any questions, drop me a line at chrislambertgardening@gmail.com. And remember to send us your images using the hashtag #thepottingshed. And don't forget, you can still watch Series 1 on the Reading Fringe Festival website at readingfringefestival.co.uk.